Welcome back. This video we're going to take a look at polymorphism in action. It actually takes a lot of examples to see how polymorphism can be useful in your projects. So we'll just start off with a easy one here using our school project. So a little refresher, I think you're all pretty good with this now, but we have exchange student and student extending person and teacher extending person. What I've done here is I've made a little class, added it to the project, and this class is called Test School. Now you'll see here Test School has two array lists that are in here. Actually, I don't even need this one here. Let's take it out. It has one array list called roster. Now you'll see the type that this is holding. It's holding type person. Now just like you remember from your previous runner, type person can be set equal to students, teachers, and exchange students or persons because the ISA, right? They are all persons. And so they qualify, right? They have the code necessary. Same thing goes when you have any type now where you see type person. You can substitute person in with a teacher, a student, or an exchange student. And this is good because what I've chosen with this array list is I've chosen the highest level, person, so that way I can add lots of different types to this array list. And as you can see here in the constructor, I've just made a random assortment of teachers and students and exchange students and persons, and I've added them to the roster. And you can see all these types get added just fine. So instead of this being an array list of just student or an array list of teacher, this one's an array list of person. So all the things that qualify as persons are allowed to be added into this array list. And so that's the first thing, and it makes it work out pretty well for us, right? Gives us more flexibility. Notice I didn't choose student or exchange student because then I'd be limited to students and exchange students or just exchange students. By making it person, I can now add all these things to the roster of my school, which is supposed to be the people that work or go to your school, right, during the daytime. So let's pop down to one of our methods that the Test School class has. And one of these methods is add person to roster. And let's make use of a little polymorphism here. When I want to add a person to the roster, what this really means is person P has to come in as a parameter. But what can qualify as a person, you're probably guessing, is person, student, exchange student, and teacher. So basically, by making this very general here, I can add anybody in. What am I doing with that person? I'm just adding them into the roster. You'll see this method here, add student to roster, takes student S in. For this one, I could give it a student, or an exchange student would qualify as a student. But I wouldn't be able to pass in a person or a teacher. Just to see this one actually working here, I've got runner 3. And you can sort of see how this actually works. No red lines. I've just made a person, a student, and a teacher. And you'll see here I've got my school object, TS. And I say, hey, TS, add person to roster P. It works. It also works if I add a student in. And it also works if I add a teacher in. They all qualify as person objects. Okay? You'll see here that I didn't actually do the add student one, but TS, add student to roster. You can see here if I put teacher in, it knows, no. This method here is expecting a type student to come in. And teacher is not type student, right? There's no connection to student and teacher. But I could give it a student, or I could give it an exchange student. So you'll see here if I actually made an exchange student, which I could just make one quickly here. And then I pass in this exchange student. You'll see that works fine, just like passing a student works in fine. But person? Nope. Person does not have the credentials, right, to be a student, so this isn't going to work. So that's sort of the basics when you're talking about polymorphism and parameters. When you actually have your methods, any parameter you have, it's flexible now, and can accept any of the subclasses down from that type. So that's one nice thing. Now another nice thing, this is all about the parameters. What about when you actually want to access the things that are in the roster? Like what can you do with them and how do you do it? Well, there's a little bit of a trick that you have to learn for this. And the trick is that you have to know the type of your list. Person. Let's go down to the method down here that actually tries to go through and show us the entire roster. So it's trying to go through that array list and it's trying to pick people out and print out their name. Now we know that this roster is holding person types. So when we pull them out, we are pulling a person object reference out of the list. Even though you know that some of them are students, some of them are exchange students, and some of them are teachers in memory, the actual object at that memory address, you have to remember the declared type that this list is storing is person. So what can you do with it? You can do person stuff with it. So let's take a peek at the code here. So I'm going to go through my roster and I'm going to pick out a person. Now notice if I put something like student, well, that's not the right type, right? Incompatible types. Required, student, found, person. So what we need here is you need it to be person because that's what this roster is technically holding. It thinks it's holding references to persons, which it is. Now, we know that you may be pulling out students and teachers and exchange students. That's totally fine. But notice what I do. Temp is a person. What can I do with persons? Well, I can definitely get their name. That was a public variable in the person class. So what I can do here is I can go temp.name. This is going to work whether it's students, exchange students, or teachers. They all grabbed the public name variable from the person class through extending. So that works fine. You actually want to give this a little run here, runner 3. You can see that this just goes smoothly. It added a bunch of people. And there's the actual showing of the list, printing out their names. Not bad. Now this whole idea here that you have to do this stuff, yeah, it is all about remembering the types, right? Now, I'll just show you a little thing about polymorphism that does work. Notice when temp comes out, you've learned before that temp is a person, and temp does have a talk method. And so when you pull this person out, no matter what type they actually are, you should say, hey, temp, talk. And remember, they all have their different talk methods, right? We made that a little overrided method so we could see the difference. And when you actually run this, you'll see it doesn't, like we've learned before, call person talk. It calls the talk method of whatever type it actually is. Okay, this happens while the program is running. This is something they call late binding. At this point, the compiler doesn't actually know which talk method is going to be called because it doesn't know what's possibly stored in the list. So it sort of decides while the program's running. It goes temp, what do you have in memory there? Oh, you got a student, call student talk. Hey temp, what are you next time? Oh, you're an exchange student? Okay, call exchange student talk. And when you run it, there should be no surprises. It does as told, and I know it looks ugly, but it's calling the right talk method from each person, right? Even though they're all technically object references to person, it knows in memory, right, what's actually there. In the next video, we're going to follow up with a little new command to let us do this method here. We'll make that a separate video. We'll see you then.